Good morning, fellas.
Morning.
Should we be doing that? Like, say good morning and start, like, officially start the show, or
Well, it is morning,
should we
but
just talk?
could be evening for other people.
Could be.
I think good morning is good.
All right. Well,
Uh,
good day to you all here in the Brave City National Headquarters, Gray Pages Central. Hey, we're gonna talk about just exactly what's been happening. We've been off at Exponential Church Planting Conference in Orlando. We all
Shout out.
spent some time there, and I've been a part of that thing for a long time, and it's made a lot of transition.
How long have you been going?
I think since '08.
Wow.
So it's been going, and it's had a lot of changes because early on it was very much like a Southern US type of conference. Ended up being the largest church planting conference in the world. But during the missional years, it was the attractional leaders that actually sanctioned all of our stuff in. Dave Ferguson's now kind of at the helm, and Dave was known more for multi-site and a big, huge network up in Chicago. But Dave was the one that really kind of like paved the way for a lot of the missional ethos into it. And so there's been a really cool partnership between, I think, more the prevailing model church leadership and the prophetic edge of the church. I think it's been a really cool spot to kind of get a little bit of both, which is kudos to them for not trying to, you know, keep the prophetic out, because many people do, I find. And many people think the prophetic is arrogant or whatever. But John's, you were not in our sessions, but um, something started to happen in our sessions that reminded me of the heyday of when Frost and Hirsch and a few others were beginning to just kind of paint a picture of a different type of a church. And you would be in rooms of 800 people, and you could hear like a collective sigh and groan when things would be said. Like it was like a guttural, um, like heads would go down, people would start crying, and then there would be a line of 100 people waiting to talk afterwards, because somehow the prophetic word in that was actually touching a real chord.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like you were giving people something they've been hungering for 30 years. A lot of times people would say, I I just wanted to know that what I was thinking and feeling wasn't wrong. They would say, I feel like I finally got a permission slip.
Mm.
Um, they would go, I've been looking for this my whole life. They'd say stuff like that. And we experienced that at Expo just a few days ago again. Like you just feel like, um, other than like an occasional person that's like sleeping, because it's a long flight in from Zimbabwe or whatever, or they're not into what we're saying, but you just feel like there was like a tangible prophetic kind of influence to what was being said.
There is a little bit of that, not into what we're saying.
I think so too. Um, but I thought it'd be good to talk about kind of the common thing that we always see is like people are drawn to prophetic, even if they're from a prevailing model church. Um, Prophetic generally is speaking the truth now, right? It's the truth that's always been there, but the truth gets through. And so most people, no matter what type of church experience they're from, generally at a heart level, even emotional level, responds to the prophetic. But after that initial kind of like, man, this just sounds great, I wish we could get there, there's almost like a pain, like an agony that comes over people
Mm.
to go, well, how do we get there? And how bad have we screwed it up? And is it too late? And what would be the cost to get there? Have a lot of people will say, they'll even say, look, I lead a prevailing model church, but I like that story better. How do we get our church to go that direction? And then you see almost like a Nicodemus moment where the prophetic word causes them to go away sad,
Mm-hmm.
or to and for the people that never even heard the prophetic to not even listen in the first place. So I just thought it'd be good to talk about maybe a little bit to the prevailing model church and people that are in that or lead that, maybe how to process a brave city ideology or architecture. Maybe talk a little bit about, you know, is it our job to get people to number one hear? And if they hear, is it our job to guide them into the promised land? Or so anything you want to add to kind
Well,
of like the setup?
just let's first do this. John, you start. Like, let's give a quick um idea of what we think of when we use the word the prophetic, because that is a very multifaceted and understood term, which I think it can be, but in the context of what we're saying, how are we presenting it?
Well, it's interesting. So yeah, the way I think about it, it's funny because yeah, and you're right. I'm glad it's good to kind of define terms, because I do think like you use that word and someone might really hear like see the future or something like that. And I do think there's an element of that, but like what I mean when I use the word is really like truth telling and getting at, I always think of like, the axe is laying at the root of the tree, like getting at the roots. I actually think something about like that subterranean reality, kind of naming the thing that is, telling the truth about that. And that there's, and while I do think what Hugh's saying for like a lot of folks that does resonate emotionally, I do also think, like Jesus said, or like how, I don't know if it was Jesus, how it's been pointed out that we always kill the prophets. Whether that, it's like was that Paul? Was that Jesus? I don't know.
So
But still
everyone,
that pattern exists because the prophetic is actually something that is hard to hear, especially if you're in the driver's seat of a structure or within a power structure, because a lot of times those radical critiques, those things that kind of they really get at the foundations, and shake the foundations in a way that is detrimental or deadly even to those with the reins of power. This is what I think we see with like religious leadership and their response to Jesus. It's like this threatens everything. And I do think the prophetic is a voice that threatens everything for those in power or in any place of oppression. That in many ways you hear like the term truth to power. I think this is the prophetic tradition, both in
By the
Christianity,
way,
and then you see this
we
prophetic.
we should all stop for a second and just recognize we've all had prophetic words towards what we've created, right? It doesn't matter, even if you lean into a prophetic idea and then you go and you create it. You're all like, if you're leading anything, you're going to get critiqued.
yeah,
And often, and so like, we don't want other people to think, well, like the way that Hugh and Taylor and John, the Brave Cities team is thinking, like we'll never, I think at some point, and it's already happening, we critique ourselves week by
Oh
week.
man, I turn on my own stuff
But
like
it is
constantly.
hard. It's hard. It doesn't matter if you think you're on the fresh edge of
well,
something. It's just hard.
there's two ways of kind of finalizing what you said. I think, John, tell me if this helps. I was recently, I think both of us were listening to this talk with Peterson and another guy, and they were just musing over sin. One guy doesn't even know that he believes in the idea of sin,
This
but
is
Jordan.
Impact Theory,
yeah,
Tom Bilyeu.
yeah,
That was a
yeah. So
great interview, actually.
yeah, so they're musing over sin, and I loved how first Peterson said sin is missing the mark. It was an archery term. We've all been taught that since we were in Sunday school. But then who's the other cat in the
Bilyeu.
Bill you says, or sin is hitting the wrong mark, which I thought was wonderful. And then Peterson said, yeah, and that's even the deeper version of sin. Missing the mark is maybe we're trying to do something that is what God is telling us to do, and we miss it. Hitting the wrong mark is such a deeper to me, it almost feels like that Revelation 18 cry, lest you take part in her
You're
sins.
saying like if you hit a metric, let's say a church growth metric, you nail it, and everybody
Nail
in
it.
the meeting is like, man, we hammered that.
We
They're
got
like,
it, but it was the
it
wrong
was the wrong
mark.
mark. Yeah.
And that's an even deeper version of sin. So I want to kind of break it down. So take that idea and then take the idea of Babylon itself. And we've talked about this before, maybe on the pod, maybe just in life, but Babylon is a lot like a magnet that's always drawing us into conforming to her. So, the scripture says, what's the verse? Somebody quoted, do not be of this world, it's in
Be
Romans.
transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah, thanks, Bible scholar. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So, no, that was great. And that's my point is Babylon is this electromagnetic field drawing us into confirmation of her every day. Perhaps it could be said every minute of every day. And so as we're constantly trying to hit marks, we are always missing them. I mean, it begs the question of these radical prophets in the Testament before Jesus were constantly calling people back to something, but yet we continue to miss marks. And while we were I want to point this out. When we were on this trip, someone made this statement of, it feels like people, men and women who always have a new way, are always crapping on the way that came before them. And my thought, honestly, was, well, of course they are, because we're always missing. We're always missing. Every new articulation is just trying to get closer to the mark that we're always being pulled from. So if someone said, is brave cities the way? We would all say, no, Jesus is the way. Kingdom is the way. Brave cities is a new iteration of let's keep pulling us back to the mark and back away from the magnet. But see, missing the mark to me,
really good.
Missing the mark is not what is so offensive to be told. If you go out and you just blow it, and I say you missed the mark, that's not that offensive. Hitting the wrong mark is what offends people. Is when you say, guys, I think we've been aiming at the wrong mark.
And that's what, like, in a prevailing model church leadership, if this is the first time they've ever heard any of this, like I remember, John, there was a little meeting we were having that was led by a group that's really about putting the newest ideas forward. And they had a panel, and a mega church pastor stood up, identified himself as a mega church pastor, and then kind of pontificated for a while, inappropriately, for about 6 minutes. We had like the guys
Inappropriately, meaning it wasn't really his
it wasn't
show right then.
He was making his show, but then at the end he goes, but I really think I'd like to move towards this. So what would you suggest that I could do to release my people towards this? And I kind of lost my brain a little bit, and I probably shouldn't have said this, but
This was a bomb.
I didn't look at him, but I looked at a bunch of young people behind him that I had been kind of making eye contact with. And I said, hey, just so you all know, our sheep are never our sheep. Like, we don't release our people to God's mission because we never called them to mission. Jesus is the only one that can call you to mission. So you don't need anybody to release you into the new thing. Just like go after it. And I was hoping he would hear it. But I was really more hoping that these younger people would go, like, at whatever point, if our prevailing model makes it feel like we have to move our whole church towards the new thing, then we're missing it from the very beginning. They're not our people. And even our methods are probably not even most of their methods anyway. It's just something that we've used to coagulate people. So I don't know. I think we've got to think the prophetic word about moving into the new isn't about moving an organization into the new. It said every single person has to hear from God prophetically and then be obedient to that.
And
that will take
here's one more thought in the prophetic, because what we're saying is contextually the way we're explaining the prophetic or talking about it in this conversation is calling us all back to the mark, or pointing us back to the kingdom. Might be the most borderline cliche, but the most kind of appropriate way of that we're wanting to think about it. And here's one other way to think about it. This is why the prophetic is so important, is because, and I really want you to like try to respond emotionally to this, John, but the mark sort of changes. The mark can change. I've kind of given this
it's not a king. It has to, because the world changes.
the
So
world changes, the zeitgeist
the
shifts.
church will always be hinged upon the apostle and prophet, is what the scriptures say. It doesn't say because I like those two types of giftings better than the shepherd teaching, but because the world is always changing, it always has to be led by the apostolic and prophetic. So there's always a word of critique at every moment, I would think.
Some of the most trusted truth tellers that I've ever known could be calling us to something in 2005 that they're calling us away from in 2015. They could be challenging something in 2015 that in 2020 they're saying this is right.
Yeah.
And that could seem inconsistent to anyone that's not sniffing the kingdom flower, but as the zeitgeist moves, as the powers adapt, like Lewis said, the powers they're taking what is pure and they're perverting it. So then the prophet has to go, that's not good anymore. That action.
Try to give an example. Like,
Well, that's what I wanted John to do.
okay, good.
You wanted me to give an example.
I want you to respond. Is what I'm saying making sense?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, and I was like puzzling over this. So there's this idea, and I want to say it was Tolstoy's idea, but like, I can't remember exactly where, but the
I
idea
have
that
an
like,
example, by the way. Go ahead.
you have a good example.
I have a biblical example.
All right.
Don't save him yet. I want to.
All right. You want to hear about this?
Well, hold on. I don't know if this example is actually going to help you.
Go for it.
Why would Paul say in Timothy, why would he tell women to be quiet and not wear pearls? Is that true? Is that truth? Is that dogma?
Can't be.
Should we go tell our wives, do not braid your hair?
It wouldn't work in my house.
Because that was a prophetic moment for him to say, don't teach, actually in Corinthians, he said, if you have a question, go home and ask your husband. So I don't know anyone outside of the hardcore fundamentalists that practice that truth. What they would say is that was appropriate and prophetic for the context. Now, some people have built a doctrine on 1 Timothy where it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. But what they conveniently did not build a doctrine on is I also don't permit them to wear gold or pearls or costly attire or braid their hair. So it seems that that moment was a timely, contextual, prophetic moment that wasn't necessary in other cultures or in other times. But we all know the history of what was going on in Ephesus at that time with women and what was happening in that moment. And so he said, listen, I got a prophetic word for you. You know what? Right now, just be quiet for a little bit. But that shifted. And it shifts in any culture or context. John, you and I have been fighting and crying. Hugh has longer than I've been an adult working for racial reconciliation, for unity and partnership among the poor, the affluent, the black, the white, the male, the female. but there have been moments and times where we've had to take a prophetic step back and say, wait, this isn't the same message that we're crying.
Yeah.
So that's my example.
Yeah. No, those are good examples. And this like deeply resonates because, and this is why I think like even like calling brave cities, like the idea of bravery and courage is a necessity because faith in some very real way is walking into the unknown, is an ecstatic reaching beyond what we understand or have capacity for. And the landscape is shifting. And so we've got to be able to apply these things. So back to this Tolstoy idea, like I think it was Tolstoy. He had this, believe it was him. Anyway, the idea was like along the way you have these like new ideas that emerge and like so you're like, hey, here's a word for today. But if we take that word and we enshrine it in brick, we turn it to orthodoxy, right? Then tomorrow it's heresy. And he's like, basically he's like, orthodoxy is always leaning in, like good thinking is leaning into the unknown. And if we make our home, it's heresy. At any point in the story that we stop and make a home on this pilgrimage, on this journey, we have become heretics because we have like enshrined what God was up to yesterday, as opposed to like having manna for today, right? And by the way, I wanted to bring up another book that's way more recent, not a theologian, about these prevailing church models saying like what could we do. One, I love the word to say like you're not in command, right? But there is this institutional structure that's in place. And what the parallel that came to mind, and maybe we should look at this and say this might be a good book recommendation for folks. Are you guys familiar with General Stanley McChrystal's book Team of Teams?
No.
All right. So when the United States military
What a
went,
great name, though.
it's a great name. It's a great book. It's definitely worth reading. When the United States military went into Afghanistan, which is like we're the biggest command and control structure, the most efficient military planet Earth throughout history, whatever. We went into Afghanistan, we started getting spanked because there's these cells. There's these cells that exist everywhere and they're like autonomous and they're decentralized and they're coming from every which way. They swarm, right?
Gorillas.
And they couldn't function fast enough because chain of command. It's like I have to go back to a commander and get word like what should I do? Like I got to go ask the pastor or something. And basically what you're describing
Great
is
example.
so mirrored in this because what they had to do was they had to break the entire system apart and retool the entire United States military into a team of teams to decentralize managerial authority and to say to each little pocket, each little operation, to say you are in charge, you have no one to ask. And so what they had to do is go, let's lay out the DNA or the goals, what they call the commander's intent. So back to the kingdom, is the ethos in you? Is Jesus Lord? Then do what he says bravely now in this moment, and we stand behind you. Like we have your back. If you act in faith in that moment, in that place, then like you have no one to ask because Jesus is Lord, the Spirit will lead you, and we are in some sense a team of teams. And I think that book was a brilliant well,
Totally.
it's a brilliant telling of a necessity for a command and control structure to exist in the new world.
Yeah.
Let's try to return there towards the end practically and talk a little bit how those that are leading kind of command and control can begin to see something move forward, or against the magnetic pull, if you will. But really quick, can we just talk just about the prophetic spirit for a second? Because I think this needs to be brought up. And not in like a defensive way, but just in, like we had, John's been kind of like known amongst us, but we had one very close friend not want to endorse the book. And he said it's because it comes across too arrogant. And he specifically said, you used to write books that help bridge old forms to the new forms. Tangible Kingdom was helping churches maybe that had small groups move into missional community stuff or whatever. So he said, I always liked the way you would kind of pastorally take people into the new thing. And he goes, this book didn't feel like that. And I said, well, you picked up on the right thing, because I don't know if you can bridge between Babylon and kingdom. Like at some point, that's why at the end of the book we say, we ask you to come out of her. You've got to come out of Babylon to get into kingdom. Jesus, I think, arrogantly spoke the same way. He didn't say, hey, take your time. There are probably 40 different levels of depth that you can go to, and then you can eventually follow me. He kind of just always, again, arrogantly made kind of a line in the sand, if you will. And
Yeah.
I remember feeling like, in some ways I kind of felt like, well, it was arrogant for you to say that we're arrogant, but I thought that was not helpful. I also know this guy. I really respect him a lot, love him a lot. But I felt like at some point, if you're ever going to say any critique and say in a loving way, hey, we can't just stay in Babylon. We've got to do something different. We've got to stop seeing prophetic words as arrogant. We knew it was a hard word. We knew there were about 20 zingers in the book that would be very hard to palate. And so we hired an editing team with the only thing we asked them to do is like, hey, take any of the arrogant edges off that just don't need to be there. They're a waste of time. But obviously don't let us lose the prophetic words that are being said. And I feel like we've got to like start grappling a little bit when we hear something that we don't like, that we don't just go right to that's an arrogant. If you listen to Taylor, somebody could hypothetically, I doubt anybody said this, but I know 100 people or so have, is that Taylor's just arrogant. And they've said it to me. A couple people have actually said he kind of comes across that way. And what I've done is go, well, hey, I don't know how it came across in that moment, but I said, I've been living on the earth a long time. I have actually never seen a man and his wife live together in such a kingdom focused way as the McCall family. Like I literally have never seen it. I've heard about him, I've read about him, but I go, this is just a guy living his life and then sharing about his life. And if that comes across difficult to you, like there's actually I think there's a prophetic thing that hits people when they just see people live at a different level. They go, well, that makes me mad because I don't think I'm going to live like that. And I think we've got to stop getting butthurt when somebody critiques us, or when Jesus says, sell all your stuff, bro, or let the dead bury the dead. I think that's part of the response of the church has to be, instead of just jumping to like critique of the prophet, to go, is it legit to their story? And if it is, well, maybe I need to listen to this thing. Thoughts? It'll be awkward for you to.
I think we should end on that, just about me and my amazing life.
No, but I do know, I mean, I've been around. I've tons of people that have these hard prophetic words, but I know that they don't live any of it.
So here's one of the probing questions that I would say has come 9 out of 10 of the panels that I've been on. John, I wish you could have been here or at this session for this panel question, because I would have loved your General Stanley McClaskey input. Is that his name? No, it was Tolstoy. It was Tolstoy. I would have loved, but so here was the question. In these micro movements, in these rabbit, not elephants. I even think I was smiling when you were giving your team of teams illustration, because I was actually in a room 2 or 3 years ago, and they were asking me, kind of help us understand the difference between what you're talking about in the prevailing model of church. And I actually said this. I said, when you think of the prevailing model of church, think of the U.S. military. And when you think of what we're talking about, think of Al-Qaeda. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple.
People didn't like that.
There were a couple vets in the room that did not like that.
Yeah, you gotta think through your
Well, but right. I don't. But my point is I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my point is in this panel this week, they were asking about heresy. And I made this statement that I don't even know if it's fully right. I just felt so compelled to say it. I said, was Jesus not a heretic? And I waited a bit, and everybody kind of course, looked confused. And I said, well, what I know is this, that there's been multiple moments throughout church history with church fathers, especially when they approached heresy vehemently with even death penalties, that Jesus would have been put to death in places like Geneva if he shared with the rich man the way to inherit the kingdom was to keep all the commandments and to sell his possessions.
I mean, man, you start thinking about Jesus and you just think like, talk about like the arrogant prophetic guy walking into a room of religious leadership, or let's say the prevailing model at the moment, and saying like, woe to you hypocrites, you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces and you don't enter, and nor will you let those that are trying to get in go in.
That's
You
right.
travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you succeed, you make them twice the child of
Twice the
hell that
son
you
of
are.
hell.
The son of
You
So
a,
are a
that's
bunch of
so
blind
that's
guys.
heresy. All right. So
Yeah.
that's heresy. Now let's take arrogance.
No,
Okay.
that's
Paul. What about Paul? Didn't he say, like, I'm better than all of you? Didn't he say, like, you super apostles? Come on, quote it for me, John. And
I
he said,
can't. The apostle of apostles, or I'm
yeah. Or he said, if it's up to good works,
right?
I'm
Failure ass.
I'm the numero uno. So here's what I said. I said, what if heresy is not a thought or a word, but it's a posture? What if arrogance is not a thought or a word, but it's a posture? And what if instead of trying to guide our people constantly away from heresy, we're just simply trying to guide them towards a posture of contrition, of interdependence,
Learning.
of curiosity, of submission?
Yeah.
You feel me? So, like, my question is, who is not a heretic if heresy is saying something wrong according to the scriptures? Who is not arrogant if arrogance is saying something that sounds haughty? But then when we look at it more in terms of a posture, then we can prophesy against arrogance. We can say, stay humble, stay low, stay curious, stay submitted. We can prophesy against heresy. We can say, stay contrite, stay, what's a word for always willing to be corrected? Stay pliable, stay malleable. Because everything we say, we're aiming at a moving target that Babylon is constantly shifting the zeitgeist. So now in a month, some prophet is, or our own prophetic, because I believe the true prophets are most prophetic towards their own hearts, are most
They should be.
challenging towards their own hearts.
Now, as you guys were there and as you started setting this up, you said, hey, when we had these rooms full of people, there was a lot of things that a lot of prophetic word that resonated. And then we kind of said, hey, let's define the prophetic. And then that brought up a lot of like tension with, let's say, leadership, those who stand to lose at the prophetic word, and the pushback, and like why we kill the prophets, why that is like, disagreeable, let's say, to them, unwanted. But then at the same time, like where it served as, I want to hear more about these rooms like that. I wish I could have been with you guys through the whole thing, but like the questions that are asked, the encounters that you had, the people that it did resonate for, because there's the other side of this for whom it sounds like it was a salve. It was a salve to some. Now, Hugh, you brought up also, then they leave and they go, shit, I don't know. Like, how am I supposed to, like, I don't even know how to begin to apply any of this, but I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh,
This
a
was good
couple
news.
things. One, I'd say 28 to 30-year-old woman came up, and you could tell she was pretty misty. I saw her the whole time we were talking though, and she was just smiling the whole time, like smiling and teary. And she came up, and I said, "So you seem pretty emotional listening to this." And she just goes, "Yeah, it's just kind of like what I always, it just seemed like the closest thing to what I read in the scriptural story of the church.
Yeah.
And I said, so what are you thinking? She's like, well, I'm in an environment. She goes, and it's a good church, but she's like, we can't get there with what we're doing. And she goes, I just got to try to decide, do I want to stay or not?
Mhm.
And then her face looked kind of sad because then it's leaving people. And so I think that's a common response when you hear a story that you go, I would rather live that story than the story that I'm living.
That's a crazy weird spin on, but resembles the rich young ruler story, like in this weird way where it isn't wealth, but it's like, I've got, this religious community, I've got this church that I belong to, but like that, I would rather have kingdom.
Well, and hers was related to her job too. I mean, she was on staff, and
Oh man, yeah,
her
that's crazy.
staff role, she's like, I can't get it. Like, I
I
don't even
depend on
have
that for
time to
income.
live kingdom. I just got this job. And
That's such a common story. People
yeah,
like literally, it's like captivity in
yeah,
church jobs.
And by the way, I don't think there's a common answer. I
no,
think what most people believe now and are settled on is that Jesus's response to the rich ruler was a contextual response, a personal response.
Specific to him. That's right.
Our guess is that he knew him. He had seen his life before. Jesus didn't live his life in a massive kind of geographical footprint.
probably knew
So
these guys.
he probably knew these guys. He probably knew what he was wrestling with. Similarly, Hugh and I were doing a workshop, and there were two young
I was
guys.
just about to bring those guys up too.
You want to go for it?
No,
Or
you do it.
really humble young guys that I would love to be, a part of what they're doing. They're sharing their story. They're in a very traditional context. If if it's prevailing model, it's like one of the more traditional
And
forms of
they're the
prevailing model.
two that are leading. They're kind of co-leading their own church.
Co-leading together, and they come intentionally to our workshop to ask this question: what do we do? And there was something about, I wonder if you picked up on it, but I picked up on it right away. There was something about their posture that I, not knowing their life, not knowing what they do, I was just able to sense they're pliable right now. They want to know where to go and what to do. So my first question to them was, are you happy where you are? I just wanted to know, like, do you like what you're doing, or is it grueling for you on a day-to-day basis? Because I could name 3 or 4 brothers right now that are doing what would be called traditional, Western evangelical ministry, and they feel like it's where they're supposed to be. And I've watched their life. I've had the conversations. I've hoped that they would say, I'm going to pull away and try something a little more grassroots, radical. And they're not, because they don't feel like they're supposed to. And I'm a huge supporter of them. So they said what I thought they would say. They said, we love where we are. We love what we're doing. We love our people. We love the rhythms, but we know that we can't, if we keep perpetuating this model solely in this direction towards this mark, we feel like we're slowly stepping deeper and deeper into empire. So that was these guys.
And so for them, it was an easy answer, is if you feel still committed to stay with these people, then just give your resource to the new artists and the new apostolic leaders around you, completely unrelated to your church. And
Mhm.
you can tell it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's a great answer.
And it wasn't quick. We went deep into it. We drew diagrams of sodalic and modalic mission and callings. We walked through the APEST. This wasn't just give your resources away. What we were saying was open your hands, guys. Like the Western church as we know it is notorious for hoarding resources. I don't just mean money or sound systems. I mean wisdom. I mean experience. I mean theologians. I mean shepherds, teachers, caregivers, money. Yes, money. Yes, networks. So begin to process together and with your people. Share the stories of these grassroots sodalic movements that are out there on the fringe, on the edge of the spear, trying to take the kingdom into places where it's not. Because I asked the question, I said, my guess is you are kind of established geographically in an area where there's a lot more like you and a lot of people that look like you. And they said, yes. I was like, great, that's fine. My question is, what about the guys and the ladies who are out there with their families in places and amongst people that don't look like them, that don't have access to the things that they have access to? And they've stepped into that theological, financial, and relational desert, and you just wave goodbye to them. Stop waving goodbye. Seek them out. Like, fall on your face and ask God where they are and how you can utilize the shepherds and the teachers and the experience and the wisdom and the patrons within your context to find those people. And they came alive. They wanted to see that. And they were like, but we've done the whole just give the missionary thing. And I'm like, I know, because that's a model that your denomination or that your infrastructure put in place, and they control it. The reason you don't like it is because it's controlled. They have to believe what you believe. They have to teach what you teach. And it's no more like Jesus than any Fortune 500 company that controls where their money goes. Release control, release the resources, and begin to come alongside these sodalic movements.
That's great. So we've this was a good little random chat.
Yeah. This was
What are
good.
some things you think people could take away from this? I mean, they'll take away what they take away, but I think we've said a little bit that we got to be really careful not to be angry with prophetic words, both personally and corporately. That the response to a prophetic word doesn't necessarily mean you all have to go into the new thing, right? So you gotta personalize the words that you hear. I would say, though, maybe as a word of warning, I don't know if I would be all that moved by prophetic words unless the people are living the story that they're trying to get you to, like, try to find true practitioners. And when they speak, I'd say, listen. If they're not practicing, then, if there's coagulating content, I'd be really careful. I would say, I keep thinking, like, when you're moving into the new, when you're moving out of Babylon, recognize, though, that, accept Jesus's arrogant prophetic statement that new wine does not go into old wineskins. So I think we just got to take that word. It just doesn't work. So pastors, if you're pastoring prevailing model and you go, how do I get my whole church to go do a brave city? That's the wrong response. The church is people. So be thinking about how to move, or invite, or I guess release, if that's how you feel, but let people, individual people, go hear what they're hearing from God. And if you can encourage that, for sure, encourage that.
That you talking about, like, not needing to give permission, and you say, like, release if that's how you feel. I think that's right. But I also think on the side of, like, young people, there is a way in which a lot of young people do want to be given permission, even if it's not a necessity. Like, you don't need permission. Or maybe, like, it'd be great if you're listening, like, you have permission, go be sent. But sometimes it is helpful to have. So even if you're not in a place where you're holding authority over people, but if you do have influence, to say to them, like, try, get after it, like, do some stuff, like, break some eggs. Like, it's okay to try some things, and to be creative out here.
What do you say?
Uh,
Raise some eggs?
break some eggs.
Break some eggs. Okay.
Break some eggs.
That makes
Also,
sense.
a lot of these questions about, like, how do I, there's ways to lay out, like, some things, but I do think all of this is a call into the unknown. at every level, where you're going into unknown communities, unknown family rooms, unknown territory, kind of outside of your known territory of your church building or your congregation or whatever. It's like, and this is the bravery it takes to do hospitality, to do mission, to pioneer new things. And so at some level, I would say embrace nervousness, like to recognize that it's actually something like a symptom of faithfulness, like you walking into the unknown. You will be nervous.
Mhm.
Bravery isn't like not getting nervous, right? And so I would just say, like, for folks that feel like they need to have this all mapped out and get these how do I do this things, like I always think of Jocko Willink, like he's got this like, how do I wake up early? He's like, you wake up early. Well, how do I eat like a good diet? Just eat a good diet. Like it's like just do, like go and do, would be a big encouragement. Like try some
Yeah.
stuff and
It's not
and
real
embrace
bravery
that
until
that
you're in the
nervousness.
lion's den, as we say, right?
Yeah.
So what you're talking about, John, is to me, is the clear difference between codependence and empowerment. And those are the two things that are being challenged. I was just kind of for fun looking them up, and empowerment, I guess a basic definition is, we might define it a bit differently, but is authority or power given to someone to do something. So you hand over authority, which means I don't control you. I don't,
This is what the military did with the team of teams move.
that's right.
They're like, you don't have
Co-
to ask me. It's up to you.
But before that, there was codependency, because codependency is excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of an illness or addiction, which the illness can be varied.
Yeah.
The illness could just be, I need you to tell me what to do. And what Hugh was saying to this man was pretty clear in the moment, is they don't need you,
Yeah.
That's right.
but you need them. So give them power and control, release power. But both words are the same. It's like,
Yeah.
people don't need you to give them permission, and people need you to give them permission. The easiest way I think about it is with my own sons. I so want to give them permission to live a radical life. But when I watch them, I just noted this a few weeks ago, when I'm at one of their games, if I'm not coaching, especially when I watch them on the floor, they will so regularly look at me in the stands. They'll just do something and look at me, and I'm wrestling with that, and I'm asking Lindsay, I'm like, God, why does he keep looking at me? And her thought is, because he adores you and he so wants your approval. My fear is that there's a codependency of playing and succeeding setting in. So I would just challenge any leader. One of your main jobs is releasing power and killing codependency.
Yep. Hey, let's just call it that then. There's the title.
What is it?
I don't know. Maybe that's not it. Releasing power. What'd you say?
Releasing power, killing codependency.
But really, the talk today was on the prophetic. So let's think of that title.
Yeah,
What do we got?
we're thinking of it live.
Or leave it. Yeah.
Uh,
It usually comes to me while we're talking.
well,
Yeah,
you've
you do
talked
usually
more than
call it
usual.
out.
Usually you write on your cup while we're
That's true. I do.
rambling.
I was pretty talky today, wasn't I?
Yeah, I like it.
Like it. We
Maybe the
like
celery juice.
it.
I I think that that one thing that we want to say to anyone listening is, stop killing the prophets. Prophets, truth tellers, stay lower than any one of the gifts. Like your gifting in particular lends itself towards haughtiness. So stay as low as you can. And truthfully, I think one of the reasons that prophetic types feel so compelled to live like maybe simple, um uh give me another word, John, like lives that are kind of free from a lot of powerful positions, sages on stages, is because they know in their soul the death that's going to lead them to. And we just want to say, like, trust that inclination, stay low, stay contrite, stay humble, be prophetic towards yourself more than anyone else.
It's good.